Hello everyone and welcome to my channel YNR Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The air in the grand foyer of the Abbott mansion was always still, thick with the weight of old money and older secrets, but on this particular afternoon, it was positively suffocating. It was the kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from the moment after a detonation, the second of stunned suspension before the shockwave hits. Victor Newman, the patriarch whose very name was synonymous with power and consequence in Genoa City, had just delivered a line that sliced through the calm with the precision of a scalpel. His voice, a low gravel that commanded obedience, was directed at a seething Nick Newman, his own son. "You hit Noah, did you?" The question wasn't asked with curiosity, but with the cold, assured tone of an inquisitor presenting an already proven fact. It hung there, a verbal trap laid in the center of the room, and everyone present, Victoria, the ever-composed business titan, Nate, the watchful physician with his own complicated alliances, and even the staff pretending not to listen from the periphery, froze, their breaths held. This was more than a simple accusation. It was the striking of a match near a pool of gasoline that had been slowly, steadily leaking for weeks. Nick's reaction was instantaneous and visceral, a raw physical recoil as if the words themselves had been a physical blow. His face, usually a canvas of charming rebellion or brooding intensity, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "What?" The word exploded from him, less a question and more a challenge, a denial of the very premise that such a thought could exist in the same universe as reality. His hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides, the muscles in his jaw working overtime. To accuse Nick Newman of many things was one matter. He had a history, a temper, a passionate nature that could lead him down dark paths. But this? To lay a hand on his own son? Noah was more than just his child. He was a testament to a love that had defined Nick's life, a complicated, brilliant young man for whom Nick would have willingly walked through fire. The accusation wasn't just false. It was a profound desecration of the very core of who Nick believed himself to be. The anger that surged through him was hot and blinding, but beneath its fiery surface, a colder, more terrifying emotion began to stir. A deep, paternal hurt that anyone, could believe him capable of such a monstrous act. The source of this seismic accusation lay across town, in the sterile, brightly lit interrogation room of the Genoa City Police Department. There, a suspect, a man whose name was initially just a blip on the radar of a sprawling investigation, was being questioned about the brutal attack on Noah Newman. The details of the assault had been gruesome. A late-night ambush, a blunt instrument, a body left broken and bleeding in a dark alley, the motive murky, tangled in the complex web of corporate espionage and personal vendettas that so often ensnared the city's elite. The police, under immense pressure from the Newman family to produce results, had latched onto a thread. Perhaps this suspect, facing the full force of the law, saw an opportunity. Maybe he was offered a deal, a lesser charge in exchange for a name. Or perhaps it was a simpler, more malicious act of deflection, a way to muddy the waters and shift the relentless gaze of the Newman justice machine onto a more tantalizing target. Whatever the reason, the statement was made, a lie whispered into a detective's ear that would ripple out with devastating effect. He claimed, with a convincing veneer of fearful confession, that he wasn't the primary aggressor. He was just an accomplice, a hired hand. The man who had orchestrated the attack, the one who had delivered the most vicious blows, was Nick Newman. When the news reached the Newman estate, delivered in a hushed, urgent phone call to Victoria, it landed not as a shocking revelation, but as a narrative that, in its warped and horrifying logic, somehow fit for some. Victor Newman, a man who had built his empire on a foundation of control, and who viewed human relationships through the prism of power and weakness, received the information with a grim, almost accepting nod. He had long been frustrated with Nick's rebellious spirit, his emotional volatility, his tendency to follow his heart instead of the cold, hard logic of the family business. To Victor, a man capable of immense darkness himself, the idea that a father could turn on a son in a fit of rage over some perceived betrayal, perhaps related to the constant battle for control of Newman Enterprises, or a personal dispute, was not unthinkable. It was, in his cynical worldview, a plausible outcome of unchecked passion. He didn't celebrate the idea, but he accepted its possibility, and in doing so, he gave the lie a terrifying credibility. His confrontation with Nick wasn't born of a desire for truth, but of a need to confirm what he had already, in some deep, calculating part of his mind, decided was a likely scenario. For Nick, the arrest of this suspect, which should have been a moment of relief, of justice moving forward, instead became the catalyst for his world collapsing inward. The arrest wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was the moment it became real. It meant the police, the media, the entire city were now entertaining this grotesque fantasy. The fact that his own father could look him in the eye and voice the accusation was a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical wound. How could you even think that? Nick roared, his voice echoing off the marble floors, the sound raw with a pain that went beyond anger. He's my son. My boy. Every instinct in him screamed to lash out, to smash the elegant vases and overturn the antique furniture that surrounded them, to physically dismantle the world that could contain such a vile thought. He saw the doubt not just in Victor's eyes, but in the cautious, measured silence of his sister Victoria, a silence that spoke volumes. He was being tried and convicted not in a court of law, but in the court of family opinion, and the verdict was a life sentence of alienation. The rage was a shield, a roaring fire to hide the devastating hurt burning within him, the knowledge that the people who were supposed to know him best, to understand the fundamental decency that anchored his chaotic soul, could believe him a monster. The fallout was immediate and corrosive, seeping into every relationship, poisoning every well of trust. Nick's interactions with his family became minefields of unspoken accusations and defensive posturing. Conversations with Victoria, once a source of strength despite their rivalry, were now strained, laced with a lawyerly caution, as if she were mentally building a case for or against him. The wider circle of Genoa City's inhabitants, from the baristas at Crimson Lights to the executives in the corporate towers, began to look at him differently. The whispers followed him. I always knew he had a dark side. A temper like that was bound to lead to something. Where there's smoke, there's fire. His reputation, carefully rebuilt after countless past mistakes, was instantly shredded, replaced by the single damning label of a man who would beat his own child. This public shaming was a unique form of torture for a man like Nick, who prided himself on his connection to people, on his essential humanity, flawed as it was. He began to isolate himself, his anger turning inward, festering into a bitter isolation. The world had judged him guilty, and in doing so it was pushing him toward the very edge of despair he was being accused of inhabiting. Amidst this maelstrom of fury and suspicion, the one person whose opinion mattered most was conspicuously absent from the chorus of accusers, Noah himself. Lying in a hospital bed, grappling with the physical pain of his injuries and the foggy, fractured memory of the attack, Noah was the silent, crucial jury. When the theory was presented to him, first by the police in their official capacity, then more delicately by his worried mother, Sharon, his reaction was not one of consideration, but of immediate, steadfast denial. No, he said, his voice weak but firm from the sterile white sheets. Not my dad. Never. His faith was absolute, a bulwark against the rising tide of suspicion. He knew his father's heart, knew the fierce protective love that Nick held for his children. He remembered the arguments, the frustrations, the complicated dynamics that always existed between them, but he also knew, with a certainty that transcended memory, that physical violence was a line Nick would never ever cross. Noah's defense of his father became a quiet, powerful counter-narrative, a single steady flame of truth in a house of lies. It was this faith, more than anything else, that would eventually begin to fracture the dam of accusation, creating the first crack through which the real truth could begin to seep. As Nick's world grew darker, his rage began to morph into a cold, determined focus. The blustering, reactive anger was replaced by a simmering, dangerous resolve. He was no longer just furious at the injustice. He was a man on a mission. If the system, the police, the media, even his own family, was so easily duped by a convenient lie, then he would have to become the architect of his own vindication. This was no longer about defending his honor in drawing-room arguments. It was about uncovering a conspiracy. His mind, sharp and street-smart, began working overtime. Who was this suspect? What was his real connection to the attack? Who was he protecting, or who had put him up to this? The landscape of Genoa City was a chessboard of enemies, both old and new. Rival corporations, scorned lovers, business partners with grudges. Any one of them could be behind this, using the chaos as a weapon to strike at the heart of the Newman family by tearing it apart from the inside. Nick's investigation took him into the city's underbelly, to shadowy figures and whispered conversations, a path fraught with danger but one he walked with the single-minded desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. His anger was now his fuel, driving him to look into abysses he would have otherwise avoided, all in the name of reclaiming his name and the relationship with his son that was being systematically destroyed. The real breakthrough would come not from a dramatic confession, but from a meticulous piecing together of inconsistencies. Perhaps it was a financial record, a payment that couldn't be explained, traced back to a shell corporation with ties to an old adversary. Maybe it was a slip of the tongue from the suspect's known associate, overheard in a dive bar, suggesting the original story was a carefully constructed script. Or it could have been a piece of overlooked evidence from the crime scene, security camera footage from a block away, timestamp to prove Nick was miles across town, or a DNA sample that didn't match Nick but did match another, more surprising individual. As Nick, often working in an uneasy, temporary alliance with a private investigator or a reluctantly helpful ally from his past, began to pull on these threads, the entire fabricated narrative started to unravel. The suspect, faced with irrefutable proof of his perjury and the crumbling of his deal with the prosecutors, would eventually break. The truth, when it finally emerged, would be as shocking as the original lie. It would reveal a plot of stunning complexity and malice, orchestrated by a foe Nick had underestimated. Someone who understood that the most effective way to destroy a Newman wasn't through a direct attack on their business, but through a calculated assault on their most sacred bonds. In the end, the official exoneration would be a quiet, administrative affair, charges dropped, a public statement from the district attorney, a retraction buried in the back pages of the Genoa City Chronicle. But the real aftermath, the emotional and psychological fallout, would be the true story. The apology from Victor would be gruff and characteristically lacking in full emotional vulnerability, but it would be an admission of a failure of faith that would leave a permanent scar on their relationship. The reconciliation with Victoria would be slow, built on a new, painful understanding of how quickly trust could be eroded. But the most profound healing would be between father and son. The moment Nick walked into Noah's room, the truth finally laid bare would be wordless. No triumphant declarations, no "I told you so"s, just a look that conveyed a universe of shared pain, resilience, and a love that had been tested in the fiercest of fires and had not broken. Nick's anger, the all-consuming fury that had defined him for weeks, would finally dissipate, leaving in its wake a profound exhaustion and a hard-won wisdom. He had learned that in a world of power, money, and cunning, the most precious thing he had was his name, and the most dangerous enemy was not the one who attacked him physically, but the one who knew how to weaponize the trust of those he loved against him. The question, "You hit Noah, did you?" would echo in his mind for a long time, a ghost of a lie that had nearly cost him everything, but in its defeat, it ultimately reforged the bonds it was meant to shatter, leaving him not just angry but wiser and fiercely protective of the truth he had almost lost. The tension in Genoa City reached a boiling point when the shocking news broke that Noah Newman had been in a serious accident. The quiet of the afternoon was shattered by sirens blaring down the street, the flashing lights of police cars and ambulances cutting through the calm. Nick Newman rushed to the hospital the moment he got the call, his heart pounding, his breath shallow, terrified that his son might not make it. Noah had been found unconscious near the edge of town, his car mangled, his body badly hurt, and the police were already suggesting that this wasn't just a random accident, it was deliberate. The moment Nick arrived, he demanded answers, shouting at officers, doctors, anyone who would listen, desperate to know who had done this to his boy. The investigation quickly intensified as Detective Chance Chancellor arrived at the scene to assess what had happened. The skid marks on the road told a chilling story. Noah's car hadn't simply gone off course. Another vehicle had collided with him head-on before speeding off, leaving him for dead. Chance ordered the car to be impounded, knowing that the angle of impact and the tire patterns could reveal a lot more than witnesses ever could. Within hours, he and his team discovered fragments of blue paint on Noah's car bumper, paint that didn't match Noah's vehicle. The search was on for a blue sedan that had been seen near the crash site, and soon enough, a security camera from a nearby gas station picked up an image that made everyone's blood run cold. The driver appeared nervous, glancing around trying to clean something off the hood of the car before speeding away. Back at the hospital, Nick sat by Noah's bedside, watching machines beep and flash in steady rhythm. Sharon was there too, barely holding herself together. Her hands trembled as she stroked her son's hair, whispering prayers, begging him to wake up. Faith came later, crying as she saw her brother lying there, pale and still. Nick's fury grew with each passing minute, his thoughts running wild as he imagined who could have done this. He kept replaying recent events in his mind, wondering if anyone had a reason to hurt Noah. It didn't make sense. Noah had always been kind, thoughtful, not someone who made enemies easily. But in Genoa City, no one was ever truly safe from betrayal or revenge. Then the police arrived with a lead. A car matching the description, a blue sedan, was found abandoned near the industrial district. It was registered to a name that stunned everyone. A man who had recently been seen arguing with Noah at Crimson Lights. His name was Tyler Burns, a local contractor who had been dating a woman Noah once had a brief relationship with. There had been whispers of jealousy, tension, and a heated confrontation between them just days before the crash. The police quickly tracked Tyler down, and when they confronted him he looked guilty, panicked and cornered. "You hit Noah, didn't you?" Chance barked as the officers surrounded him. Tyler's face went pale, his lips trembling as he tried to deny it, but his voice shook, betraying him. Nick, hearing that a suspect had been taken in, stormed into the station, demanding to see the man who had hurt his son. Chance tried to stop him, insisting that the investigation was still underway, but Nick wasn't listening. "I want to see his face. I want him to look me in the eye and tell me why," Nick shouted, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. When Tyler was brought in, Nick lunged forward, restrained only by Chance and another officer. "You hit Noah, didn't you?" Nick roared, his voice cracking with pain and rage. Tyler stammered, saying it was an accident, that he didn't mean to hurt anyone, that Noah came out of nowhere. But Nick wasn't buying it. "You left him there to die," he shouted, tears filling his eyes. The station was tense, officers stepping in to calm the chaos, while Sharon arrived moments later, pleading with Nick to stop before he did something he couldn't take back. As the interrogation continued, Tyler's story began to fall apart. The police had found traces of Noah's car paint on Tyler's bumper and shards of glass inside his grill. There was no denying the evidence. Tyler tried to claim he panicked after the crash, that he thought Noah was fine, but the inconsistencies in his statements made it clear that he was lying. Chance leaned across the table, his voice calm but firm. "You didn't call for help. You didn't stop. You knew what you did and you ran. That's not panic, that's guilt." Tyler put his head in his hands, whispering that he never wanted things to go this far. He admitted that he and Noah had argued, that anger got the best of him, but he never expected the confrontation to end like this. Meanwhile, word of Noah's accident spread quickly through Genoa City. Victoria, Nikki and Victor gathered at the hospital, all shaken to their core. Victor's face was stone cold, but inside he was seething, already thinking about how to handle the man responsible. Nikki tried to calm him, knowing full well what Victor was capable of when someone hurt his family. But Victor's silence was more dangerous than words. He simply promised that whoever did this would pay dearly. At the same time, Mariah and Tessa came to see Noah, both devastated. Mariah, ever protective, couldn't hide her tears, blaming herself for not noticing that something was wrong. Tessa tried to reassure her, but the grief in the room was overwhelming. Back at the station, things were spiraling. Tyler's arrest made headlines, and soon reporters were swarming outside the police department. The Newman family name was once again at the center of chaos, with media speculating about whether this was another targeted attack. Nick, furious that his son had to suffer because of someone else's jealousy, vowed he wouldn't rest until justice was served. "You don't just get to walk away from this," he told Chance bitterly. "If the system doesn't punish him, I will." Chance warned Nick to stay out of it, reminding him that taking matters into his own hands could destroy everything. But Nick's anger was consuming him. In a quiet moment later that night, Nick returned to Noah's room. The steady beeping of the monitors was the only sound. He sat beside his son, gripping his hand tightly. "You're strong, buddy," he whispered. "You're gonna get through this. I promise you that." His eyes welled with tears as he thought about all the times he tried to protect his kids, only for something like this to happen. He blamed himself, convinced that if he'd been more careful or more involved, maybe Noah wouldn't be lying in that hospital bed. Sharon came in quietly, resting her hand on Nick's shoulder. "You can't blame yourself for this," she said softly. But Nick just shook his head, lost in guilt and rage.